Hello guys, this is CannibalChess, and in today's video we're going to be looking at the game that Magnus arrived 25 seconds late to against Hikaru Nakamura in the 2023 Norway Blitz Chess Tournament. And so Hikaru with the white pieces starts the game with d4, Magnus goes d5, and here they just go into a symmetrical variation, just bringing out both of their knights on the king side. Hikaru decides to bring out his dark square bishop to g5, attacking the knight a little bit. And so Magnus here, he decides to move the knight to e4, therefore attacking the bishop and also asking Hikaru what he wants to do with his bishop, because now this bishop it's not really attacking anything. And so the next move, Magnus could play something like this or even this to just kick away the bishop entirely. So instead of waiting for that to happen, Hikaru just moves his bishop back to f4 here, which is a safe move. And here Magnus decides to strike in the center, trying to get a little bit of an advantage, a little space advantage in the center of the board here with these two pawns. And instead of taking here wouldn't really be that good of a move for Hikaru, because now he doesn't really have any pawns to guard this square. He does have the bishop, but other than that, there's really no guard for the e5 square. So instead of doing that, Hikaru just defends the pawn on d4 by bringing his e-pawn to e3. And so Magnus continues by bringing his knight out. Hikaru brings his knight out as well, and they continue bringing their pieces out until Hikaru plays this pawn move. And so the idea of this move, the computer is suggesting to do this probably to just get the one of the last minor pieces out, so then Hikaru could just castle kingside, be a little bit safer. But Hikaru here, he wants to open up this short diagonal here, possibly for his queen to come to b3 or even a4 at some point, and then maybe have a double attack on the knight once he then plays something like bishop to b5 here. So that's his idea here. Now Magnus, he could try and close the position for sure, but I'm pretty sure Hikaru would be fine with just playing something like b3 at that point to try and reopen it back up. So I don't think that would be too good of a move for Magnus to just try and close it all the way. So he doesn't there, and he continues to open up a diagonal here for the dark square bishop to come out, and then he can castle kingside as well to get safer. Here Hikaru does play the queen to b3 move, and the computer doesn't really like it. They want Hikaru to just get rid of this knight on this nice outpost on e4, which probably it does make the most sense, probably to most people. But here Hikaru just wanted to go for this weak pawn on b7, and so Magnus just decides to defend it with the best move. He just moves his queen up one square to just defend it sideways. Hikaru continues by putting some pressure on this knight now, because now the knight is pinned to the queen and the queen is pinned to the king. So this is a very interesting position here where a lot of pieces are pinned basically. And Magnus continues by taking Hikaru's knight, and instead of taking with his knight here, which probably would have been the best move, Hikaru actually decides to take with his king. And I'm assuming he wants to connect his rooks, and he just wants to make it a little bit more of an unbalanced game here, but still not very advisable move here by Hikaru. So Magnus continues by pushing this pawn, and he's just trying to make a way for him to possibly push this. He could also maybe push this in the future, just to create like a big pawn wall that's like slowly coming down to Hikaru's side. And there's not really much Hikaru could do about this move for sure, because his queen's on this side. These two pieces, they're not really able to jump anywhere like here or here, because Magnus just played this pawn move. So there's not really too much Hikaru can do in this position right now, which is why Magnus here has a little bit of an advantage, like a 0.4 advantage here. And so Hikaru continues by playing on the side that he has an advantage on, which is the queen side, by double attacking this knight basically. Magnus just moves his queen side rook over to defend, and then here there's a take on c5, just trying to get rid of a few of Magnus's pawns that are just blocking the center. And the commentator, when this happened, was saying that Hikaru is breaking like a lot of the rules of high-level chess, basically, because he's putting his king on an open file. He basically created like a semi-open file for Magnus to attack him on here, and so that's just it's not a very good idea to do that usually, especially if you're playing against one of the best players in the world. So they just thought that was kind of weird, and is kind of weird. But yeah, so after Magnus plays this push, then Hikaru, of course, has to go back. He can't really go forward any of these squares because of the pawns. So he's just slowly losing mobility of some of his pieces. And then here, Magnus takes the pawn that took his pawn, so he just gets the pawn back, basically. He also gets to activate his dark square bishop here, which is very nice. And now he has like a whole lot of defense on this square if he wanted to push now, like for sure. So he could basically probably do that if there wasn't this pin on the knight is the thing, because if he does that and you take, then the knight can't really jump in and take at some point, because then the queen would be attacked by the bishop, basically. So as long as Hikaru has this pin here, he's probably decently safe. So Hikaru continues by bringing his rook over, possibly having ideas of manually castling kingside. Something like that would be a decent idea for sure. Magnus just continues by pushing his pawns, and that's really Magnus's whole thing in this game, is to just push his pawns as much as possible, because he does have a space advantage right now for sure, and he does for basically the whole game. So Hikaru just brings his bishop back, and here Magnus decides to reroute his knight, but also ask Hikaru, do you want a queen trade? And Hikaru, of course, accepts this trade because his queen is just not really doing anything on a4, so he decides to go for the trade. And here Hikaru does manually castle, and there are a few minor pieces moving around, like the bishop going here, and Hikaru playing this move to just try and get a little bit more of a space advantage as well. But it's still not working out too well for him, because Magnus is still controlling the center very well. So Hikaru tries to move his knight over here, possibly to move on to this side. That it seems like it would be a very logical move, since he's not really doing much over here. He can't really go to any of these squares. Going on the very rim of the board would just not make very much sense. So it would make sense to try and go here and then maybe attack this bishop, also defend this square as well. And I mean, you could maybe go to a5 at some point too, maybe. But Magnus continues to push his pawns here. There's a rook to c1 move, and here Magnus brings out his knight to a better square. So he attacks this bishop. I don't know if you'd want to trade the bishop here, because this bishop is so bad that like it's basically not really worth anything. It can't really do anything in the game, so I don't think Magnus is going for a trade here. He just wants to put more pressure on the king side as much as possible. And so Hikaru brings his bishop back. I'm assuming he doesn't want to trade if Magnus decides to go for that. And so Magnus reroutes his knight. There are a few more moves where Hikaru plays this. He's trying to get his bishop a little bit more active on this diagonal. I'm surprised that this... I wonder what would have happened if Magnus would have played this. Okay, it would have been like an even game, basically. Oh, and then Hikaru just goes back to e2. Okay, that makes sense. But you wouldn't want to play that, because then that gives the dark square bishop more range, basically. That makes sense. So Magnus continues his pawn pushing, and then Hikaru does indeed play this move. He also gets a little bit more of an open file now for his rook to attack this pawn on, because the knight's out of the way. Magnus continues to reroute this knight for whatever reason he has. And here there is a trade finally. And Hikaru decides to try and push his pawns. But as I said earlier, Hikaru, he's trying to attack on the queen side. He's not really doing very well defending on the king side, though. And so he just continues by taking this pawn. And then Magnus, not worrying about this capture at all, he just decides to go ahead and capture Hikaru's light square bishop. And so there's another capture, king captures, and then pawn captures pawn on f3. rook captures, and then this lovely knight to g5 move. And so he's going after both of these pawns, can't really defend both of them, so the king defends that one, Magnus takes the other one, and then Hikaru plays a pawn up move. So he's basically asking Magnus what he wants to do here, because at this point it's a tie game, you know. If both people play this right, then it should be a tie, but both of them do make some mistakes. And I'm not going to go through all these moves because I think there's still like 30 moves left or something like that. But basically what happens is Magnus brings his rook down here. He kind of gets it stuck there for a little bit, and there's nothing that Hikaru can really do here because his king can't come over here to dislodge this knight. The knight is attacking this pawn and this pawn, so it's not like the king could just like go over here, because then the knight would probably take the pawn on f2, and even if the bishop was here or something like that, then that still wouldn't be too safe, because at some point Magnus could move his knight here or something like that, and therefore making a way for this pawn to come down. And the king couldn't really do anything about it, basically. So that's mainly what's going on here in this position. Hikaru's just trying to get his rook into the position a little bit more, but there's nothing he can really do with his rook because of how the king is on this side. All of the pieces that are doing basically anything are on this side, and these pawns are blocking the rook from getting at the king in any way, basically. So there's not really too much that Hikaru can do here except for take the pawns on the queen side. And Magnus here, he finds a way to get his king into this little area here where all the rest of the pawns are. And he actually ends up sacrificing his knight in this position for the pawn on f2, just to weaken Hikaru's pawn structure a little bit more. And so he finds a way to get over here. And now, because the rook has this clear-cut path on the g file, the king is kind of stuck on these squares right here, which is pretty bad for Hikaru right now, especially because he now can't do really anything about this h4 pawn. So he has to move his bishop back because it's being attacked, and then Magnus basically finds a way to get his rook into the position and take away some more of Hikaru's pawns. And so he's basically just dominating the entire position. He has to keep moving his king around because Hikaru keeps trying to find ways to check the king and make it basically a draw. But in this position, Magnus is basically totally winning because of just the pawn advantage, how Hikaru's king stuck here, the bishop stuck here because it has to protect the king against the rook. So there's really nothing that Hikaru can do here except for just wait for Magnus to push his pawns down and then basically just promote to a queen. He can't really stop all the pawns, basically. And so in this position, Hikaru basically just resigns the game because, yeah, there's too many pawns. He can't really do anything about it. If he tries to take on f2 here, then Magnus just has to play promotion on b1, and that would therefore check the king. And then after the king moves, then you just take the rook and it's game over. So the game ended with Magnus beating Hikaru, and I hope y'all enjoyed this video, like my analyzation. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel, check out my other videos, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.